All right, so you're ready to deep dive with us into this pretty tricky area of French grammar.
Absolutely.
And I know this is something that folks are going for the pronunciator certificate. You're going to want to know this stuff backwards and forwards.
Absolutely. And I think you've come with some excellent questions to help us really parse out the difference between these two.
Yeah, let's talk about venir de plus the infinitive and the passé récent.
Okay.
And I guess maybe we should start with, like, how do those two things differ?
Well, they both kind of express the recent past,
Yeah.
but the venir de plus infinitive really kind of has that like hot off the press feeling,
Okay.
like it literally just happened.
Got it.
And the passé récent is still recent, but it allows for a little bit more breathing room.
Okay.
So it's kind of the difference between saying, I just finished my coffee, and I finished my coffee a little while ago.
I see.
So if you literally just put down your coffee cup,
Yeah.
you're going to say, je viens de finir mon café. Whereas if you finished it like 15 minutes ago, you might say, j'ai fini mon café récemment.
I see, yeah. So it's that, like, right now versus recent?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, let's take these one at a time, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's start with venir de plus the infinitive.
Okay.
Now, I'm always curious about when you have an infinitive like that, does it ever change form or is it always just infinitive?
It always stays in its base form.
Okay, great.
So, je viens de manger 8.
Okay.
Je viens de finir mes devoirs. I have just finished my homework.
Okay.
So you see those infinitives, they're never going to change.
And it's the venir that changes based on who's doing it.
Exactly.
So, tu viens de 8.
Exactly. Il vient de...
Nous venons de.
Okay, yeah, so far so good. Now, what about negation? I know negation can always be tricky in French. So how do we form a negative sentence with venir de plus infinitive?
So it's ne pas. And you're going to put that around the venir.
Oh.
So you would say, je ne viens pas de manger. I haven't just eaten.
And that little de always stays there.
It always stays great.
It's always de.
Okay, and then just to make sure that we're really clear on this, that venir is conjugated based on the subject.
Exactly. Present tense.
Present tense.
So, tu viens de. Il vient de. Nous venons de.
All right, good. Now, what about reflexive verbs?
Oh, yeah.
Those always trip me up a little bit in French. So, for example, se laver,
Right.
to wash oneself. How does that work with venir de?
So you would say, je viens de me laver. I just washed myself.
Oh, okay.
So that reflexive pronoun just tucks in there
Yeah.
right before the infinitive.
Just tucks in. Cool.
And you still have that same sense of immediacy.
Okay, all right, so that's venir de plus the infinitive. Let's move on to the passé récent.
Okay.
Now, I know that we said that it's, recent past, but not like immediate past. But what about like the structure of it?
Right. So the structure is venir, conjugated in the present tense,
Okay.
plus de, plus the past participle.
Oh, de plus the past participle. Okay.
Yeah. So if we were doing to eat, it would be je viens de manger. I have just eaten.
Okay, so again, that viens is going to change based on who's doing it.
Exactly.
All right, now I know that we talked about that it can be recent past, but not like immediate past.
Right.
But are there like other time frames that
Yeah.
venir can express?
Well, if you use the imperfect tense of venir, then that's going to shift the event further back in time.
Oh, okay.
So you could say like, je venais de manger. I had just eaten.
Interesting. So even in the recent past, there could be like layers of recency.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So what about questions?
Yeah.
How do we ask a question using either of these tenses?
So it's just like a normal verb conjugation. You can invert the subject pronoun and the verb to form a question.
Okay.
So you could say, viens-tu de manger? Did you just eat?
Okay.
And for the passé récent, you could ask, as-tu fini ton café récemment? Have you finished your coffee recently?
So pretty straightforward in terms of forming the questions.
Yeah.
Now, I think one of the trickiest things about these two tenses is when we're translating from English.
Yes.
Because sometimes you'll see, I just did something.
Right.
And it's hard to know, is that venir de? Is that passé récent?
Right, exactly. And that's what we're going to get into next, is looking at some of those trickier translation situations and how to really figure out how to choose the right tense to get that meaning across.
Awesome.
And we'll also look at some other bonus insights about these tenses that you might not know.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's take a little break and we'll come back and we'll talk about some of those trickier situations.
Sounds good. All right, so let's dive into some of those trickier translation situations
Okay.
where it's like, do I use venir de? Do I use passé récent?
Yeah, exactly. And I know that's going to be really important for the pronunciator certificate.
Yes,
Because they're going to give you situations and you've got to know which is which.
exactly.
So give us some examples.
Okay, so let's say we have the sentence, they just arrived. Now, if you want to emphasize that they literally just arrived, like they stepped in the door, you'd use venir de. So you'd say, il vient d'arriver. They just arrived.
Okay.
But if you meant that they arrived recently, like maybe a few hours ago, then ils sont arrivés récemment. They arrived recently. Using the passé récent would be more fitting.
So that just now versus a little while ago.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So really think about, what is the speaker emphasizing?
Got it.
You had a great question earlier about regional variations.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that.
Yeah.
Because, we learn all these rules.
Right.
And then it's like, well, do people actually follow them?
Right. Well, language is a living, breathing thing, and so it's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And so while both of these tenses are widely understood, there are some regions that might favor one over the other in everyday speech.
Okay.
It's kind of like how some people say soda and some people say pop.
Right. Yeah.
It's the same concept, just different regional flavor.
I like that. That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier that we could swap out venir altogether.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So if you replace venir with another tense, like the imperfect or the subjunctive, you're not only changing the time frame, but you're also changing the mood of the sentence.
Oh.
So you could say something like, je devais venir de manger. I was supposed to have just eaten.
Okay.
So now we're kind of introducing that conditional tense in there. Yeah. So it's not what did happen, it's what should have happened.
Wow.
So there's lots of different things you can do with these tenses.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
You also mentioned the il y a plus simple phrase, plus que.
Yes. How does that compare to venir?
Yeah, because I've seen that construction, and I always think, wasn't that kind of the same thing?
Right. Well, they both kind of express the recent past.
Yeah.
But il y a plus time phrase plus que is much more specific about the time elapsed. Oh. So you might say, il y a 10 minutes que j'ai mangé. I ate 10 minutes ago.
Got it.
So you're really pinpointing that time. Whereas with venir de, it's much more general, you're just.
I see.
So again, it kind of depends on the situation, the context.
Right. And maybe the level of formality, too.
Exactly.
Yes.
Now, before we move on, I want to talk about one other way to express the recent past in French.
Okay.
And that's using the verb aller, followed by an infinitive.
Okay.
But there's a twist.
Ooh, a twist. I like it.
So while venir de is kind of looking back at an action that just happened, aller plus the infinitive is talking about an action that's about to happen.
Oh, okay.
So, je vais manger, I'm going to eat.
Right. So that's future.
Exactly. So it can get a little confusing because you have these two constructions that both use an infinitive.
Right.
But if you look at that main verb, venir means to come. So we're coming from an action.
Okay.
Whereas aller means to go.
Yeah.
So we're going towards an action.
Okay, I'm going to write that down. Aller is towards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's all about those subtle little details.
Yeah, I'm noticing that. Now, we've been saying that venir that expresses, that immediacy.
Right.
But are there any other nuances to its meaning?
Well, it can also sometimes convey a sense of excitement or surprise.
Oh.
Which you don't really get with the passé récent.
Interesting.
So let's say you were at a flea market and you found a rare book.
Okay.
You could say, je viens de trouver un livre rare au marché aux puces. I just found a rare book at the flea market.
Okay.
And it's not just that you just found it.
Yeah.
But it's like you're so excited about it.
Right. Like, look at this amazing thing I just found.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it adds that extra little emphasis.
Uh-huh.
And that's going to be more common in informal contexts.
Oh,
but, for the pronunciator certificate, they're going to want to see that you know how to use both.
Right. They want to see both. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we talked earlier about how sometimes even native French speakers mix up these tenses, especially in casual conversation. So what does that tell us about the rules of grammar?
Right. It tells us that language is fluid.
Yeah.
And that even native speakers don't always adhere to those strict grammatical rules.
Yeah.
Especially in informal settings.
It seems like the main takeaway is to understand the nuances.
Exactly.
And then just pick what fits the situation best.
Exactly. And, as you become more and more comfortable with French, you'll get a feel for, when it's okay to kind of bend the rules a little bit.
Right. Like once you know the rules, you can break them.
Exactly.
Okay.
But for now, just focus on getting those fundamentals down.
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, I think this has been a really great overview of these two tenses.
I think so.
But we should probably take another break and then we'll come back.
Okay.
We'll talk about some of the specific things that might trip people up on the pronunciator certificate.
Okay, so we're back, and I think we left off talking about some of the challenges that people might face, specifically on the pronunciator certificate.
Right.
So do you have any specific examples that you can think of that would really kind of highlight these differences?
Absolutely. So let's think about like how to express someone just finished doing something.
Right.
Because that's a very common situation.
Yeah.
And it can be a little bit tricky.
Right, because it could be either one.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So let's say someone just finished reading a book.
Okay.
So using venir de plus, the infinitive, you could say, Elle vient de finir de lire un livre. She just finished reading a book.
Okay.
So really emphasizing that she just closed the book.
Right, like that moment.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
But using the passé récent, you could say, Elle vient de finir un livre. She has just finished a book.
Okay.
So it's suggesting that she finished reading a book recently.
But not necessarily like in the last second.
So
it's all about those really subtle distinctions.
Yeah, so venir de plus infinitive. It really is like just this second.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's all about that feeling of immediacy.
Got it.
But both of them are correct.
Right.
It just depends on what you want to emphasize.
The nuance.
Exactly.
Well, I think this has been a really great deep dive
into
these two tenses. I know they can be tricky.
Yeah.
But hopefully now you're feeling a little bit more confident.
I hope so.
In your ability to use them correctly.
Yes.
And I would definitely recommend checking out Pronunciator's library module.
Absolutely.
I know they have a lot of great resources.
Yeah, lots of practice exercises.
Yeah, practice exercises. Even some practice tests, I think, to help you get ready for the certificate.
So you can really test your knowledge.
Exactly.
And make sure you understand.
Yeah, and even just, watching French movies, listening to French music.
Absolutely.
Reading French books.
Yeah, anything to get that exposure.
All of that is going to help you really kind of internalize.
Right, it'll become much more intuitive.
Yeah, exactly.
The more you practice.
Now, as a final thought before we go.
Yes.
I want to leave you with this question.
Okay.
Imagine you're telling a friend about your day.
Uh-huh.
And you want to tell them about something that you just finished doing.
Okay.
Versus something that you finished earlier in the day.
Okay.
How would you say those two things in French?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah. And which tense would you use?
Right. Which one would you choose?
Yeah, exactly.
And why?
Well, I think on that note, we'll leave it there.
All right.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, happy Frenching.
Au revoir.